welcome to all of our listeners, and thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time today to listen to this conversation, which I believe is going to be a very intriguing one, a conversation about a topic that continues to get more popular. You're going to see and hear more and more things about this coming up in the near future across the board. So we're going to talk about sports psychology and the important role that it plays in our sport and performance environment. So again, my name is Aaron. I'm excited about this topic because in full disclosure, I'm in the process of completing my master's degree in sports psychology. So it's been something that's I've been interested in a little while. With my, I'll say my growing and still limited knowledge in the area, I'm extremely happy to have Dr. Robert Schinke on with us today. Most of you have probably heard of Dr. Schinke. I know we had him on for an author talk. I believe it was at the end of June this year to talk about his book, Gifted, 8 Steps to Succeeding in Sport, Work, and Life. And we're going to touch on, some of the things obviously that's mentioned in the book, but hopefully get into maybe a little more depth on some of those topics today. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Schinke. I really appreciate it today.
Oh, it's delightful. It's funny, I listened to you speak and about how much you have to learn. And after 30 years of graduate school and postgraduate school and onward to being a faculty member, I know less, or at least I feel that I know less today than I knew 30 years ago. So I totally understand where you're coming from.
And I think that's one of the interesting things about, this subject area. And honestly, I mean, we could probably go any, science-based subject area that it's going to continue to evolve. We're always going to continue learning new things about it or finding new ways to help people. Again, I think maybe we should start off with, we had you on for an author talk a few months ago. But if we have any new listeners or someone just kind of, getting involved in the conversation, can you give a little bit of your background and kind of how you got to where you are today and maybe what interested you initially in this subject area?
Yeah, absolutely. Like many mental performance consultants before me, I began as an elite athlete. My father was my coach, my stepfather, and I started off as a provincial and then a national level athlete in the sport of equestrian, 3-day eventing, which is jumping over fences and dressage and show jumping, all of those things together. And at the time, my confidence was really variable. It fluctuated from really wonderful in certain competitions to questionable in others. I ended up becoming the captain of the Ontario Young Riders team. So I went to 4 North and South American junior championships when I was a junior from age 17 to 21. And at the age of 21 was on my first Pan American Games team and senior Canadian team. By 1991, I was shortlisted again to the Canadian equestrian team, had qualified that year with the IOC certificate of credibility for Barcelona Olympics. And I just didn't have the nerve to continue in equestrian. Applied to graduate school and was subsequently taken on at the University of Ottawa and championed by Dr. Terry Orlick, one of your authors. From there, I went on to graduate school at Ottawa University and then a doctorate at the University of Alberta and a postdoc in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. And then from there, became a professor at Laurentian University in its sports psychology program and became a Canada Research Chair in 2010, launched the area of cultural sports psychology, and from there became the president of the Association for Applied Sports Psychology in 2014, and then in 2017 to present have become the president of the International Society of Sports Psychology, the editor of the International Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology, and also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Sports Psychology in Action. My applied work is with high performance sport, primarily with combative sport and primarily with professional combative sport, though I have been involved in 8 consecutive Olympic Games. A lot of my clients are from around the world, from the United States, from Latin America, from Africa, and I travel the world working with athletes and working with my colleagues in Asia at several universities, investigating differences of perspective in relation to high performance sport topics like suicidal ideation, recovery from injury, broader transition scholarship, and cultural inclusion.
So a variety of knowledge there, a variety of experiences to help get you here. But that's one of the reasons that I'm completely thrilled to have you on, to give your insight and your perspective specifically on this topic. So I'm interested just to kind of get into it a little bit. What were your first experiences in sports psychology like, and kind of being introduced to it at the beginning?
Yeah, I was on the national team in equestrian, and these were early days, the 1980s and the early 1990s for sports psychology, though Terry Orlick and John Partington, another Canadian, were at the apex of the field at the time, and unknown to Western audiences, very well established field in the USSR, now Russia, as well as in China, where they've had a fairly advanced sports psychology over many decades. And I was introduced to sports psychology early days as an equestrian, and I was doing intuitively a lot of these mental training topics that you're going to raise today. I was doing, as many athletes do, on my own. Issues of imagery, sometimes not adaptive imagery, sometimes really maladaptive, negative imagery, playing out in my mind, self-talk, sometimes resilience fostering, and sometimes resilience impeding, goal setting, questions of confidence, planning, and so the sports psychology consultant came in front of a group of us and started speaking about sports psychology a few weeks before a major international tournament. And it really wasn't the thing for me at that point in time, only because it was so short duration time to that major event. And I'm not a great believer in changing things at the last moment before an important competition. But that was my introduction. And then I started reading about it. Jerry Lynch, one of your authors, who did a lot of work on Taoism and Eastern mindset and applied sports psychology. Terry Orlick, a wonderful man. In Pursuit of Excellence, and all 5 editions of that, also in Human Kinetics. And those were some of my earlier readings. Dan Millman, who wasn't a sports psychologist, but was a gymnast and I think a trampolinist at the time. I really liked his work at the time. And that brought me into a graduate degree in sports psychology, which I started on probation and then excelled and went onward.
Very cool. So I think we come at it from slightly different perspectives. Like, you were actually introduced to it as an athlete. My interest has come as a trainer, a strength and conditioning coach, where for a little more than 10 years now, I've been working with youth athletes. And I think just over that time, I've kind of seen more of a need maybe for some of those athletes to get a little more knowledge in this specific area. Like some of the things that you just mentioned, I've noticed that a lot of them are dealing with some type of anxiety. Definitely the youth, junior high school age athletes dealing with confidence issues. I love self-talk that you were just mentioning. I work with a lot of tennis players. Some of that's natural, some of it is more strategic, but so I think just kind of getting that perspective and seeing the need for that is the reason that I started to dive a little deeper into this. Now, with the athletes that I train most, I see how mental performance training can certainly help everyone. Like I mentioned, like more specifically from the ones that I work with, like tennis, golf, track and field. You have worked extensively with, like you said, more combat sports like boxing and martial arts. I'm curious, what are some of the ways that you've been able to help them most, or maybe what are some of the issues in those specific sports do you see come up more frequently?
Yeah, and I'm working actively with various sports, equestrian. I've returned that, and I'm working with World Cup equestrians, and last year was or this past in West Palm Beach before the Olympics, helping athletes from several countries prepare for the Olympic Games. With professional Ironman, a whole diversity of different sports along the way. Ice hockey. I work with athletes at a very high level in that sport. a whole diversity of different sports. In boxing, the issue was always one of confidence and the reality that it's going to be physically challenging and physically painful, and also emotionally painful.
Right.
Going to the ring, people know that they're going to get hit. Going to in UFC and in professional boxing. So that's the challenge there with endurance sport. And I'm also a master's endurance runner. I just finished a half marathon weeks ago.
That's right.
At and I've done that as well. And even in my own skin, I know that it's going to be very painful. Point in the race, and it's going to be acutely uncomfortable, and that it's surmountable, but in the moment it's consuming. And so when I'm working with endurance athletes, they know that what lies ahead in a World Cup competition is going to be somewhat painful and highly taxing. I feel very vulnerable at that, and the question is a question of persistence, and sometimes even not only stepping beyond their fear, but overlooking some of the pain that along with pushing one's body to the outer limits of a sport, and sometimes shutting off the self-talk, sometimes having really adaptive self-talk. Those are some of the discussions that we have. I think also a broader discussion that goes on with athletes across all the sports I'm working with is one of health. And it's really important that they have an identity that's comprised of more than just their sport identity, so that they can curate, as I refer to in that book, Gifted, various gifts in their life, and not just the athletic one, and not just confined to a single sport. So you have, or I've worked with athletes who have been multi-sport high performance athletes, and then they've become coaches, or they've moved on to marketing opportunities, and then gone on some to education, some to careers in real estate, all kinds of different things, promotions, managing high performance athletes. It varies with the athlete, but I think that the ability to not be stuck in a single identity is tantamount to health and well-being, because an athletic experience and an athletic journey is precarious, and it's not. Right? You're going to have injuries, you're going to have setbacks, you're going to have redemption stories, you're going to have success, and you're going to have a time where it will be obsolete. That experience will be obsolete, and has to be planned obsolescence, as opposed to being moved out of the sport and deselected.
I think it sounds like that's that's an area where maybe not only active athletes can benefit from, mental performance training or some areas of sports psychology, but also, like you just mentioned, kind of transitioning. I've had friends, I certainly never competed at a super high level, but I've had friends that, played at a high level in college in various sports. Some of them went pro, and then it's kind of, I guess we hear stories all the time about athletes have such a regimented schedule all the time that they get done competing, and then suddenly they're not sure what to do. Maybe they're not sure what career to transition to. They're not sure even how to structure their own day. I guess this could also probably go into military too. I know a lot of military personnel are very regimented, and then they might get out, and it's almost like they're starting over again.
Yeah, in all careers, right? And you have to have a plan for each stage of the career, and a plan beyond this career onto your next interests as well. But when I was working with Team China, doing research with my colleague, Dr. Liwei Zhang from Beijing Sport University, what we were looking at was the issue of suicidal ideation, and also the issue of injury and recovery, and all of those things with national team athletes in a monumental country and teams such as Team China. The challenges and the mental skills required are actually very different depending on whether they're new to the team, or whether they're sophomores, or whether they're veterans on that team, or whether they're moving towards retirement and onward to the next stages of their life. And even they have the self-talk, they have the pressures they experience are entirely different by country, and also by stage in their career. So mental skills, as we know them, the skills that are presented in Pursuit of Excellence and Jerry Lynch's book, and many of the other books out there on mental skills, discuss the mental skills as something that we can intervene, and they're part of a toolkit. And yet they have to modify, oftentimes in relation to culture and in relation to stages in one's career, and onto the next stage of their life.
Very good. Now, I know you've mentioned self-talk a couple of times. That's an area that I'm also interested in. And I'm thinking specifically, you know, performers or athletes in the moment during competition, where different, I guess, opportunities that they can use self-talk. Now, like you mentioned, this could be good or it could be bad if you are struggling in your game or your performance. It's pretty easy for anyone. I think it's going to be natural to kind of put yourself down and kind of withdraw from that situation and think that you can't do it. Maybe have a little bit of self-doubt. How would you kind of turn that around for someone to make that positive self-talk to kind of propel them to, you know, finish a race or, you know, finish a competition successfully?
Yeah, let's step back one step, if I
Uh-huh.
might. The whole discussion on self-talk is it's a mental skill, and that is correct. And you have chapters in every mental training book about self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
The origin story of that particular topic stems back to attribution theory in the with Bernard Weiner, and then onward to the work of Martin Seligman with optimism and helplessness, and onward to scholarship and resilience, which has been prevalent since 2000 onward. And so it's all formulaic in terms of managing self-talk. And there are books that clearly target that. Books such as Learned Optimism targets it, and I do as well in particular chapters such as the endurance chapter in the book Gifted. Self-talk is something that moves you, ideally it should be process-oriented as a rule, as opposed to outcome-oriented. And when it's outcome-oriented, outcomes are not typically a controllable factor. Whereas a process is something within each one of us, and if we work the process, we typically get to a better outcome. So the self-talk that should be playing out in one's mind, if one reverts to self-talk in a moment of immersion when they're actually competing, it should be towards narrowing down and working the process and staying within one's game plan. And that reduces pressure, increases focus in the right direction, and moves us towards our aptitude as an athlete, and so that we play out the strategy as we saw it in our mind's eye weeks before. Now, when you're dealing with athletes in competition, they have variable confidence, and that's a known factor as well. And confidence is something that stems back to a lot of the scholarship on self-efficacy. And we know that it's easy to be confident 4 or 5 weeks before a race, whereas the week of the race, confidence diminishes. And the question is, how do we buffer that and augment it? And we augment it by working the process, recalling past experiences where we were really effective in what we were doing, looking at like the self-talk we playing is very process oriented, and then controlling our emotions and our arousal levels with somatic things like managing our breathing, which therefore manages our heart rate. So are all strategies that improve self-confidence, and then you bring those into the performance and your confidence holds steady, where most people sometimes ebb even ever so slightly in competition with their confidence.
Something you mentioned there was obviously drawing on past performances too, which I think is a big one. I also coach track and field athletes, specifically high jumpers, and I've had situations in the past where I think it's true for all athletes at some point, people in general. You're going to come to a point in the season where you're going to struggle a little bit. You're going to slump for whatever reason. And I found that very beneficial in especially a technical sport like that, where I can just show an athlete a video of a past performance where maybe their approach was, you know, near perfect, or maybe their launch point or takeoff was extra good. And I guess that kind of sparks or triggers a memory of, hey, I have done this before. Maybe a little bit in kind of reviewing that technique, but just maybe the mental aspect of believing in themselves again, that I have done this before, I can do it again.
Yeah, and it goes further than that.
Yeah.
Is of course we're going to tap into past experiences, and if we diminish our confidence or limit our resilience, it's because we're tapping into experiences that are negative experiences that diminish our confidence. Whereas if we tap, as you pointed out, Aaron, into experiences that are positive and constructive, then we reaffirm that our capabilities. At the same time, this is where logbooks come in, and those are part of a mental package as well. Is the logbooks, though anecdotal, unlock the idiosyncratic nature in each one of us of what it is we need to do systematically in order to run a checklist, and then perform at our capability. And each one of us have nuances in terms of the things we need: amounts of sleep, nutrition, thought processes, surrounding ourselves with effective support, effective warm-ups, and some of us require longer, slower, more gradual warm-ups, other ones more acute, sharper, shortened warm-ups, key discussion points and keywords. These are all elements that also tie into our confidence package. So we can rely on our past memories, and then we have to also have this condensed summary sheet from our logbook of what are the to-do concepts and ideas that we're going to structure into our competition plan in that final 24 hours leading into when one walks to the line or walks to the ring or walks to the court, whatever it is they wish to do.
Something else I'm thinking of too, trying to hit on multiple areas here, and I think is becoming more popular. Maybe, I mean, you probably used it for a long time. Is the idea of imagery, or the I guess the strategy of using imagery. From your experience, how effective has that been? I know there are some people that struggle in that area to image a certain scenario, situation, environment. And others seem to be a little more natural with it.
Yeah, and the performance imagery that we've done, I picked up some really neat tricks from a wonderful professional coach in boxing from Cuba.
Okay.
In terms of mental rehearsal and how to structure it. And what I came to is there's general imagery in terms of performance, and yet the imagery that I landed up doing in the final decade in working with high-end amateur boxing, which I no longer do. I do more work in the pros than I do now, is that we would actually do the imagery in time. Just so, and I remember Terry Orlick speaking about this with me when I was a graduate student, where he would actually time a downhill skier like Franz Mueller when they go down the hill, and he would be pretty accurate with a stopwatch to the time it took them to complete the course. Okay. Similarly, when we were doing boxing, the walk to the ring, we would do the mental rehearsal and all the keywords, and we'd come up with those keywords collaboratively, myself and the athlete, and fact check it with the coach, and then the walk into the ring, and then to the corner, and then the touching of the gloves, and then the start and what they want to achieve in the first 30 seconds. And every round was a timed 3-minute round, and within the 3 minutes, there was 30 seconds to create that first impression with the judges, then the implementation of the strategy once they had a really good handle on the opponent and how they were going to use their skills, to the final 30 seconds, so that there's like this recency effect where, because it's a subjective judging in a very short period of time, at the end of each round, people who are judges typically recall that final 30 seconds. So increasing the volume and stealing those rounds and doing the rehearsal strategically by a clock in relation to the sport. So it's time specific and strategy specific, approved by the athlete and designed with the athlete. And that's and how that has come into play, which is really wonderful, is over the course of COVID, when there was no contact with other athletes, trying to get athletes ready for the Tokyo Olympics, and it was postponed by a year, we were doing that mental rehearsal work with specific targeted opponents and their play. And I was doing that once or twice a week with every single athlete on a given national team, so that we were working on variations of tactics and how to use your skill with one sort of athlete versus another sort of opponent. And because the athletes didn't have access to sparring or competition, that was what made them sharp.
Wow, so detailed. That's so intriguing, that you cut it down to the very minute, especially in the case of the skier that you were talking about, and the boxing match too. And I think that's something that I'd always heard of imagery, and that it was a strategy that you could use, but it is so detailed. It's really a skill that you have to practice over time. It's not something that you can do like once and say it's going to fix everything or improve you drastically. Is that something that's been maybe difficult for people to kind of understand and realize right up front?
Well, the skill itself is an important skill, but it has to be developed, particular imagery, in collaboration with the coach, in collaboration with the athlete, and sometimes the sports psychology consultant could then read that script to the athlete with the timer in their left hand, script in their right hand, and they can actually strategically use an imagery that has all of the tactics that the athlete and the coach want implemented in the performance, and then the sports psychology consultant comes in to really reinforce it, so it's not left to the athlete to figure out the timing and the tactics where they might miss one or two things. All of it is condensed into the performance, and then the mental rehearsal is comprehensive, and you don't leave those sorts of crumbs on the table in terms of one minor tactic or another. So it's a really complete way of doing it.
Very good. And I think that's so you mentioned scripts, and I want to make sure that people listening do understand this, that it is something that you do have to rehearse over and over, and you want it to be pretty much the exact same thing every single time.
Well, it has to be relevant to the competition environment, the context. Right. It has to be relevant to, if you have an adversary opponent and it's an interactive skill, has to be relevant to the opponent, has to be, you have to take in the conditions athlete is going to face. Otherwise, it's this decontextualized, disembodied mental rehearsal. Now, mental rehearsal can be motivational. One sees himself on the podium, and Terry Orlick spoke about this in his book Psyched, which was based on the anecdotal work of interviews with Canadian Olympic medalists and world champions. So he interviewed a whole pile of athletes from a whole series of different sports and found that this motivational imagery, a lot of them saw themselves on the podium. And yet the other version, the part I'm talking about, is more the process-oriented imagery of the athlete ready to do this all-encompassing, consuming, complete performance at the right moment, so their confidence doesn't diminish. It stands the test of time, and then their adversary declines, and then they emerge victorious and with a better experience to strengthen their confidence leading to their next event.
How much have you seen this it really improve an athlete or a performer's performance? Because I think a lot of times like I said, this area is becoming more common. I think a lot more athletes are taking advantage of this. But for a while, it was always the physical side of performance that everyone wanted to prepare for, which is obviously very important. But how much have you actually seen that improve an athlete's performance?
It depends on the receptivity of the athlete. It depends on the delivery of the skills. I had one wonderful experience with an athlete who was highly aroused and very, very nervous before competition in the 2 days leading up to a competition. And what we landed up doing is doing actually a different kind of imagery, which was a relaxation imagery on site with at a major event, with the sound of the arena in the background, and seeing that sound, like having some somatic control, some control over one's breathing and one's circulation and one's thinking, while all of these distractions are going on around the athlete. And then the athlete became more and more comfortable in the competition environment and landed up being the athlete of the tournament at this major event. And the turnaround was almost instantaneous. Wow. In 2 days. And then the athlete went on to win that event and then become world ranked, and then moved on with his career. So it's really quick, but the athlete has to be really receptive. And sometimes receptivity is also a matter of urgency and having tried many things. I've had many athletes come to me over the course. I remember my first professional world champion and said wasn't a believer in sports psychology, and yet was pretty desperate to succeed. Career was coming to an end, hadn't won a world title, and then engaged as a last-ditch effort, and the turnaround was within 6 months, the person was a world champion.
Oh, wow.
Went on with his career. So those sorts of stories are ones that a lot of active sports psychologists at the higher levels will come up with in their various sports. But the feedback, like the support, has to be concrete. It can't be esoteric. It has to be really functional. And the way to do mental skills, and the way I envision it, is tied to existing knowledge and tested theories like confidence, self-efficacy theory, resilience and attribution theory, and understanding of optimism and how self-talk links to that. And so we have to have an evidence-based approach to our mental skills. And that's really important, as opposed to just relying exclusively on the mental skills without understanding how to do them systematically, and then taking those to the athlete and partnering with the athlete and the coach to come up with the perfect recipe.
You've been working in this for a pretty long time. How do you see this continuing to grow in the near future?
Well, I think technology is going to play a huge part in questions of understanding analytics in terms of mental rehearsal. We started doing that in professional boxing and really on analytics. I know that in the National Hockey League, they're doing it, and in the NBA, they have people who are solely crunching numbers in order to give those sorts of facts, which then translate into the coach and the sports psychology team working with the athlete, taking that information and getting those athletes to adapt as much as possible before the competition to the competition itself, so that by the time they hit the field or mount the steps to the ring, that a lot of the adaptation has already taken place. And that requires a lot of evidence and knowledge that comes from viewing video footage, looking at social media posts, really studying adversaries and studying conditions, and bringing that to the mental rehearsal and bringing it in understanding of the context, so that someone isn't overfaced when they step into that context.
Very, very, very intriguing conversation. I wish that we could get more in depth in each one of these. Maybe we can have another discussion where we kind of break these down and have multiple where we kind of break down each different strategy or component there. I think that would be an interesting idea, especially for our listeners too. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would love that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Maybe we can get that set up. But I do want to thank you for your time today. I won't keep you too much longer. Everyone listening, if you haven't got your copy yet, I'll go ahead and put this out here again, Gifted. Excellent book. A lot of the strategies and some of the stories that we talked about today, go pick up your copy. And I want you to, if you can, give the listeners some way that they can kind of keep up with your work and keep up with all the knowledge that you're sharing, because you do have a lot of knowledge, and I thank you for sharing all of that. So I'll give you the last word to kind of wrap it up and maybe to let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, and you can find me on Instagram at Rob J. Schinke and on Goodreads as well. I'm there now of late. It was a bit of a challenge to get in there, but now I am. And as for the book, all the concepts in the book that moves you towards your giftedness in various contexts and moving from one gift to the next so that you're really adaptive and healthy in your progression in life is all based on evidence and theory applied and contextualized with some exercises and skills and takeaway reminders. So it's there for the taking, and I hope you like it.
And I think everyone will. Definitely everyone listening, look up Dr. Schinke. I can say I've read some of your research in my own studies. I definitely appreciate that and all the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for your time today, and hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure.